Oops. So my husband and I had solar panels installed on our house last weekend. This is our house. If you've been watching this program, you've probably heard that we just did a giant remodeling project. We were living out of the house for 10 months. We've just moved back home. You can't see behind me. I know it looks like I'm sitting in the hills of Sunol, but really in the next room, there are just piles of boxes in our living room, our dining room, the bedrooms. But we did these great solar panels put on last week by Sunwork, and we can heartily recommend them. This is our before the solar panels picture. Sunwork makes solar panels affordable by using trained volunteers to install solar panels on homes with low electricity bills, where it may not have been economically practical to install panels. Sunwork is a nonprofit solar installer whose motto is small solar made affordable, and indeed they did. In addition to keeping the labor costs low, Sunwork provides the equipment at cost. There's no markup. If you have a low electricity bill, this is your opportunity to have solar panels installed for up to 30% less than you would pay through a conventional installer. You can contact them at sunwork.org to find out if your home qualifies for their program or if you're interested in volunteering. I'd like to say that we couldn't have been happier with the job that Sunwork did. Everyone from the administrative staff, the installation lead, and the volunteers were a pleasure to work with. The installation went seamlessly, and our solar panels are working right now, creating the energy that I am using to be able to send this program to you. It's very exciting, and with the 26% federal tax rebate and Sunwork's reasonable pricing, the cost was affordable. And my husband's been tracking the amount of carbon that we have saved by having the solar panels on our roof and not using power from PG&E. And I can't remember what it is, but it's huge. It's like, I don't know. I can't remember how many pounds. I wish he was here, but I was so impressed when he told me. So, all right, I'm going to move on now to Jamie Marantz's garden in Oakland. And Jamie will be talking about her Flatlands makeover, conquering concrete and creating places for pollinators, people, and Paloma, the dog. Jamie has been working on her garden for many years now, as we'll hear about in her videos. Most recently, she has worked with Donna Bodine of Beeland Gardens to create this garden, which has a nearly year-round blooming season. A swale and dry creek bed retain rainwater on site, keeping the garden green longer, replenishing the aquifer, and keeping the nearby creek from scouring. And since the transformation, Jamie has now seen nearly 30 species of birds from her deck. These include ruby-crowned kinglets, Bewick's wrens, black phoebes, and Nettles woodpeckers. Before we go to meet Jamie, let's watch this brief introduction to her garden talk.
Oh, Kathy, you're currently muted.
Yep, that was fun, Jamie. Thank you.
That's what happens when you learn to make movies late at night. Crazy things happen.
Well, I'm glad you did. After seeing that, I can't wait to see the full story.
Oh, it'll be a letdown for sure.
Well, I don't believe you. Let's go see. Let's take a look. You have 2 videos or 1? Remind me.
2. The first one is about like how we got the garden, and now is what's the garden like now.
Okay, let's go see the first video. Then we'll take a little break for some questions. Then we'll go into the second one.
Great.
Hi, my name is Jamie. Welcome to my garden. I'm super happy that you're here, and I'm excited to show you our baby garden. Even old people can have young gardens.
I waited for years after taking classes in California flora and fauna as part of my biology degree to give back at least a small plot of land to the California flora and fauna that was here before we stopped letting it be here. We finally did buy a house in 2016 in May in the flats of East Oakland. And when we bought it, there were lots of things that had to happen to the house as well as the yard. The front yard or yards were basically full of 50-year-old juniper mounds, and the back of the house was full of concrete, delightfully painted red, and dilapidated fences, stumps, painted concrete, rocks, pretty bad. So we had to do a lot of things to the house. And in 2016, the year we bought it, I first decided to clear all the weeds in the back and the juniper in the front. We then simply cardboarded over the dirt, the stumps of the weeds that were left, sheet mulched it with cardboard from our packing boxes, as well as from Monahan's Paper in Oakland. Great place to buy rolls of cardboard. We then covered the cardboard in bark mulch and let it be for quite a while. We then had to get a deck so that we could get into the yard, since the only way to the yard was through the laundry room downstairs. So we finally got that done and had our first party on the concrete. Later that year, in November, we finally planted 2 of the front beds, the right and the mid, that we had removed the juniper from in the front yard. That was all we could afford that year. And then 2017 rolled around, and I finally finished the left side of the front yard, where I added a little flagstone path and a berm, since when you got out of your car, you walked right into the garden out of your door. So we needed that little path there. In 2018, we finally replaced the street tree that was a hideous dying mess, and I finally planted the left front bed. We also, in May, destroyed a bunch of mega weedy trumpet vines and all kinds of hideous things that were growing up and over and through the fences that we left, and tried to repair some of them. Finally, in the end of 2018, we had enough money to remove that concrete. Yes, it did take us 2.5 years to get here, but hey. And in December, we finally started the makeover. In the new year, we began by replacing one entire fence, the long length of the yard, almost 85 feet, the whole thing, and that was pretty fun. We drew out the beds. I kind of did the design, and I had a woman named Robin Storm at the time helping me, but she literally like a month or so later had to move to Maine for a family emergency, and it was me and some guy who was helping me finish. Not the best way to go, since some of the issues that I had later were from lack of expertise in the original layout. Anyway, we lined the beds with moss rock, added a ton of compost and mulch, several yards. And then during the winter, we saw that water was an issue, and so decided to incorporate a swale on the bottom left portion of the yard to keep the water in and to not develop lakes as well. By April, we had finally finished the raised beds and a little doggy play area. Finally, in May, the hardscaping began. And by June, you could see that there were actually things growing in the garden. Totally wrong time of year, and yet it was what it was. And so some of the plants did not make it through that summer. But A lot of them did. You know, I planted as I went, so some of them got planted in February, April, little bits here and there. And then time goes on, and I am having strange die-offs in places, etc., and not really understanding what was going on. The irrigation seemed uneven. Things were not as they should be in Mudville. I would go and replace them. Many of my plants I've gotten from East Bay Wilds, love them. Finally, in July of 2020, I finally find Donna Bodine. And over the next 8 months here, she has helped me unbelievably. She traced and replaced a lot of the existing drip lines and unearthed it all and found it and fixed it. And we now have 4 separate zones, one for the trees, one for the veggies, and one for the north and south sides of the bed. She also helped with plant replacements, what would be good for these areas, etc. She's a great pruner and has really helped to make my plants so much happier. And now we have the garden that we have. And in the second half of today's talk, you will see that. If you have any questions about where I got any of my materials, what some do and don't be's, I'd be happy to answer them. All right, and talk to you in a minute.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So let's see, I have some questions for you. So how would you suggest that someone can get started? You had a kind of a wreck of a yard when you first moved in there. So you're someone else now that's looking at their same, a lot of work in front of them. How would you suggest that they get started?
Well, I think for me, in general, not being overwhelmed by the whole thing and trying to do it all at once. So, for example, those front pieces were very small. And once I was able to get the juniper out of them, I just did one piece at a time. Once I got into the backyard, I just had to, again, we removed all that concrete, which was several thousands of dollars because it was like 3 layers deep. I don't know if you could see that. There was concrete on top of like brick on top of concrete. I don't know what was going on there. Stumps of trees we didn't know were there, had to be removed, and all kinds of fun things. So we did that. And then I was like, wow, I'm broke. So I just carpeted it with cardboard and then went and got tons of mulch, covered it, and left it like that for a year. It was, I just did one thing at a time. I think if you just chew off one thing at a time, it's a lot less daunting.
Mm-hmm. And then how about the swales and the berms? Like, can you tell us, like, why did you decide to create those berms and the swales, and the drainage also is interesting?
So it's hard to tell, but the yard slants kind of from up this side, where's my hand, kind of down this way, just slightly, right? Because I'm on a slope, very mild slope here. I'm kind of a block above foothill, so I'm not like in the hills or anything like that. So when it rains, it flows down to that corner of the yard in general. And so I said, well, let's stop it. So right to what looks, I guess, to you to be on the left side of the screen where those poppies are, right in between them, there's actually a rock. We just dug basically a long ditch, a couple feet deep, filled it with drainage gravel. And then at the end of it, it comes close to the foot of the house. And we dug a really big pit there, big, deep pit there, stuck gravel and extra concrete chunks and crap in there. And then it comes right up against a perf pipe that goes along the side of the house. Not a true French drain, but drainage for the yard. So it slows it down, it collects a lot of water in there, and then when it gets totally overfilled and up to the top, then it kind of drains out in that pipe. And I haven't had a lake since, though we haven't had a very wet winter since either. So, and then because of all that concrete on the ground, I figured that ground had to be compacted like mad. So instead of rototilling and just ripping it all up, we just poured I can't even tell you, truckloads of compost on it, hardly any dirt. I think it was like 3 1 compost to actual like garden soil, and just piled it up about maybe 18 to 24 inches high, and then put the moss rocks around it and basically planted right in it, and then mulched the heck out of it. And everything's been doing great. I haven't lost anything to bad drainage as far as I know.
Okay, let's ask one more question and then we'll go on to your second video. So Gretchen asked, you said you made some mistakes due to inexperience. What are some things you would do differently if you were to do this again, knowing what you know now?
Well, I would have been more careful about where the sun is at different times of the year and my neighbor's tree. So like where my the raised beds are for my vegetables actually should have been on the other side of that path, and the garden should have been on that side of the yard. Well, what can I tell you? But it's okay. It's not the end of the world. They get a little afternoon sun. So that's one thing. Number 2, when you do the original layout, get someone who understands how to do irrigation. So, because that can turn out to be a real pain if it's done wrong the first time. Literally, Donna was like on her hands and knees, we're going around there. And she's like, so where do you think this one goes? And I'd go over to the thing and I'd turn on valve 1. Is that it? So you don't want to go there. You want to get someone who knows what they're doing, especially with irrigation. That I totally, completely, wholeheartedly say do that.
Okay, good. Why don't we go now and watch your second video? We'll take some more questions afterward.
Okay.
Hi, glad you could make it to the second half. Let's tour the garden as it exists today. In the front, you can see that I try and anchor most of my beds with a manzanita or some other really strong anchor plant that's going to last for many, many years and be great for pollinators and birds. I'm very, very into birds and birding and supporting local pollinators and bees with the garden. And you can see that here with sages and manzanitas. Over here we have lots of pentstemons and some pretty annuals, penny black, poppies, and some beautiful cream colored ones. I have some bulbs in here as well, Brodea, Tritillaria, and of course lots of buckwheat, because buckwheat is fantastic, beautiful, and very important for many local pollinators. When you come into the back, the first thing we see along this southern wall here is a big, well, what will be an even bigger blue elderberry. Great umbels for pollinators and fruits for birds. On the fence, you'll see I have a couple of trellises. I have a virgin's bower that's going to bloom later, and a small Dutchman's pipe that is going to be really big by the end of this season. It's in its ready to jump season. And in this area, you can see the goldenrod anchored, which is great, again, for many pollinators. Here's another great anchor, a ceanothus. And you can tell they are absolutely loved by bees and pollinators of all kinds. Great friends of manzanitas. And I love these Diplicus, which I call sticky monkey flower and used to be called mimulus, but now we have to call them Diplicus. I love them. I have several different ones in the garden. They're beautiful. The hummingbirds love them.
I feel that you have to stay.
No, I don't feel like I have to. I can't drive myself away.
I also enjoy sulfur buckwheat back here.
Let's go along the back wall of our fence. We start on the left with several sages, excellent for pollinators and birds.
This is where I have some Phacelia and some gilia that I had to protect. This year, the birds wanted to eat the gilia all the way to the ground. I lost several of them.
And then you can see this Rogers red grape climbing up this pergola. I'm excited, that should cover us this year. Another great plant for birds, food, and in terms of berries. And then along the back wall, you can see our anchors. Again, very bird friendly and pollinator friendly. Coffeeberry. Then we have a prunus, a toyon, and then a baccharis in the corner. And underneath that, the understory is made of eucharas, which are loved by not just hummingbirds, but many other birds. This back wall was home to a ruby-crowned kinglet this winter, which was great to watch. We then come up the north side of the yard, and you can see I again have echoed with our sticky monkey flower. You can see some blackberries. We eat those not for the birds. And then the echoing continues with lupin, ceanothus, a manzanita, a little coyote mint, and a daisy that will pop up here later. Again, having things that bloom at different times of year is really great for pollinators and birds alike.
The middle of the yard is basically an echo of other places, so that there's a nice repeating theme that really, again, supports pollinators and birds. We have perennial anchors here that you've seen before, like sticky monkey flower, blue-eyed grass. There's a mallow and a lupin, as well as some actual grasses here. We again sprinkle annuals among them that really favor pollinators, such as poppies, tidy tips, and some gilia. And other pollinator favorites, like this milkweed mixed in with some checker bloom and baby blue eyes, a really hot spot for pollinators. As well as that hummingbird back there. Yep, that's him on a sticky monkey flower.
That sticky monkey flower is in full sun, but is happy because he's in the island of the water feature. That's what you see there, a bird bath with a small solar fountain in it. Water is absolutely a necessary requirement for all wildlife, but especially birds. I've seen all kinds of insects and butterflies in there as well.
I will replace it with a more natural, larger feature. That'll be one of my next projects. But I also planted things around here that can take this extra water. Columbines, Faribault Springs, etc. Lastly, you will see this very tiny Western Redbud here. I planted a really beautiful Western Redbud the very first spring, and of course it died that summer. And I vowed to get another one, and all I could find was this tiny little 6-inch tall one at the Tilden Botanical Gardens last year. I think this is its second or third year, and look, it's starting to look like a tiny miniature tree. I'm very excited about it. All right, that's it for this tour, and I hope you have lots of questions, either about why I planted what I planted, or where, or other birds that I've seen and how I attracted them. Anything you like. It's been great. Thanks so much for coming.
That was fun, Jamie. That was great. Thank you so much. So let's see, we had a number of questions. So somebody asked, what's worth spending money on and what's worth doing yourself?
I think anything you can do yourself and don't have the money for is worth doing yourself. Though I almost always end up hiring some folks to do things like lug the rocks from the front to the backyard, because I'm like an old woman. old woman baby garden. And I'm just not picking up rocks like that anymore because it's just too hard on my hand. I think any of that hardscaping stuff you should pay someone to do, even if you quote unquote design it yourself. It's much better to have someone who knows what they're doing, because poorly done hardscape can just be a pain for a long time. So I think for sure I would have someone do that and help with that irrigation, and even help you with your first, like those anchor plants and things that are going to do well in your garden and are going to be real important pieces. And then after that, you can play with it. Like you put something in, it doesn't grow. Oh, well, that wasn't a great plan. Put it somewhere else or put something else there.
And did you sheet mulch yourself, or did you get help with the sheet mulching?
No, I pretty much did that with myself. And so some of the people you saw, my godson was in there killing the vines. And so he came around and he works pretty cheap. And some of the other guys I hired who did the heavy duty removal of the big weedy crap that was all over the place and hauled that away. And then I went to Monahan's and just loaded up. I thought I'd have enough because I just moved a couple of years ago. I had all these packing boxes I'd saved and didn't even cover a third of the yard. So that I did that myself and then had them dump mulch. I am really happy these days you can use Be Green, which is an Oakland source for things like mulch and compost and dirt. They used to have to go all the way out to Richmond. And so I have a little old truck, you probably saw it, and I can go and load it up with mulch myself. They'll dump it right in the back of your little truck, or you can get bags there. Even they bag it right there for you, or they'll deliver it for pretty cheap. So I love using them for that kind of stuff. And then I
hadn't heard of them before. Thank you.
Yeah, BEE Green. They do also beekeeping stuff, and yeah, they're very cool. They're down by the Coliseum, actually, in that kind of weird zone.
Okay. Somebody asked about your trellises. They saw a lot of beautiful trellises in your yard. Any stories behind those?
Well, when I built, I do a little woodworking. I did some of someone asked about the raised beds. I worked on those too. I built one of the trellises, bought the other trellis at Economy Lumber, because I don't like those cheapy diagonal ones. That square one, I actually bought that one. And then on the other wall, I used this thing called hog wire that you can buy now that they make like for, I don't know, different things. And I just put some 4x4s on the fence so it would be raised off the fence and put it on top of that. And it grew right up that thing.
Nice. So I loved your living fence, your hedge along the fence, the prunus, elizabolium, the toyon, coffeeberry, the lilac. Like that's going to be fantastic when your fence is really just a green living fence.
Yeah, and there's nothing back there worth looking at either, but I also didn't want to put big trees there that would actually end up shading the whole yard. So I got things that were, going to be more like in the 10 to 20 foot range, hopefully. So they seem to be really going crazy back there. Super happy.
Those are all the keystone species. So you took care of all of them except for the oak. But I mean, the Prunus lucifolium is a great one. You don't see that very often. And it's also very high on the Doug Tallamy Index. Yeah,
there's even a golden currant over there. I forgot to say about on the right-hand side there. So that area is really strong. And then on the other side, it's sages. So hopefully that back wall is going to be just like monstrous.
So your solar fountain, how do you have it fed like by your drip system? Is it constantly dripping or you feed it with a hose?
So that there's that little black thing in the middle. That's the solar fountain. It's like $20 on Amazon. I bought the one that seemed to be the highest reviewed. I figured it would work for 3 months, but you know what? It's its second year. It's still going. I have to go out there and sort of spray it out every day, every other day, and just top it off. So it's not great. I want to do a recirculating thing that is stays better and has more different kinds of features for different kinds of birds and things. But it's been great in terms of like everybody goes there. I was having a crow problem for a while. This guy was bringing hot Cheetos. One day there was a piece of pizza in there. The next day there was literally a leg of chicken. He had brought half a chicken with him. I don't know. Anyway, he seems to have gone off now. Like, thank the Lord. Yeah. So lots of compost. Yeah, lots of compost in there. And they seemed fine with it. I know compost is rich, but I don't know. I had nothing but compacted clay. Wanted to do something about that.
Well, let me say that your trailer was one of the highlights of having to do a virtual tour again this year. So I want to thank you for the late night video production and thank you for showing us your garden. If
Okay.
you want to stick around and answer any more questions that people might have online, I'm sure they'd be grateful.
Okay. Be green in Oakland.
All right, Jamie, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Have a great one.
Okay.